All right, amazing. Welcome everyone to the 10x Go-to-Market podcast. I'm so excited to have Avtar here today. He's the VP of Global RevOps at Benchling, where he does a little bit of everything in the RevOps world. So we're going to dive really deep into what it looks like to transform RevOps from reporting to strategic leadership. So everything from his career journey, how to build strategic partnerships with CROs, and more. So if you haven't been here before, you haven't listened in, this is your chance to ask incredible experts like Avtar all of your burning questions on everything go-to-market and RevOps, and I'm sure AI will come into this as well. So before we dive in, Avtar, thank you for being here. Can you give us a little bit of a intro into who you are?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me, Alexa. Really appreciate it. My background, I feel like similar to a lot of operators, I kind of fell into this. It wasn't something that I graduated from college. I'm like, oh, I'm gonna go into operations or RevOps. I was an engineer by background, training, but I wouldn't call myself an engineer in today's terms. Did that for a very short period of time before deciding I wanted to go more the business route. So I jumped into strategy consulting, did that for a couple of years before starting my own firm, which was kind of a mix between strategy consulting and venture capital investing, where we worked with large enterprises, would help them figure out the digital strategies, and then would go find startups that would, be a value add, invested in them, and then actually help implement. Decided after 5 years of running that, wanted to go more the SaaS route. So jumped into SaaS at a company called Datica, where I led business development. So carried a bag for a little while. And luckily for me, my COO kind of abruptly decided to leave. And so I started taking on more operations responsibilities and honestly fell in love with it. I feel like operations or RevOps in general is the only career in which you get to use data to set strategy. And unlike a consultant where give a deck to somebody and say, okay, good luck, you actually get to figure out how to operationalize it and implement it. What are the people, processes, technology you need in place to actually execute on that? And so since then, I guess then over a decade now, I've had the good fortune of working at a few different companies and kind of helping build or scale the RevOps function, everything from 0 to like 350 million in revenue.
That's just so you've done just a few things. Just a few things. And it's so interesting you say kind of you stumbled into RevOps on accident. That was same with me, and it seems to be very similar for a lot of people. And the consulting and RevOps overlap is more than I would have expected. So, you've built RevOps now at 4 different companies. So, what initially drew you to RevOps, and how has your approach of joining these companies and building it from scratch changed over time?
Yeah. In terms of what drew me to it, it is that ability to like use the data and analytics to set strategy and then actually figure out, okay, how do you go execute on this? Because there's a lot that falls apart when you actually take something that like on paper looks really great and then you actually try to make it work. And so that kind of ongoing feedback loop that has to take place. So, okay, like, okay, my assumptions here were wrong. How do I actually iterate on this? And that was the part that I really enjoyed. So I get to use a little bit of kind of all my background on a day-to-day basis. In terms of how my approach has changed, I'd say the biggest thing that I learned after I've gone to 4 different companies now is that there's no one playbook that works. And so the only, I guess, playbook I have is that every time I join a new organization, I spend the first 45 days just really trying to listen and learn. The people on the ground know a lot more than I'm going to coming saying like, oh yeah, the best way to do X, Y, and Z is to do this, or the best, like the pipeline metric that everyone uses, like 3x coverage. That's what you need to use. Like, now that doesn't work for every business, and there's a lot of reasons as to why. So really trying to understand, like, okay, what can I learn from the people that have been here for a while? What is the data telling me? And then really setting out a plan for the next 6 months or so. Like, what do we need to stop doing? What do we need to do more of? And what we need to start doing? And like, whether that is we need to bring in new technology, whether we need to set new processes up to make sure that we're executing on our goals, we need to hire new people, whatever those things are, really just making sure that the infrastructure is set in reality as opposed to of like the business that we're in, as opposed to like best practices in the in the industry.
I think the listening tour is so important when people come in and try to make decisions right away. Usually, two things happen. One, you're likely making the wrong decision and you're making changes you're going to have to pull back later. And two, you're going to piss a lot of people off. And you don't want that happening early on. So it's both kind of a learning and trust factor. So let's
100%.
let's dive into Benchling specifically. What was the state of RevOps when you joined, and what's your vision for where you want to take it?
Yeah, so I was very lucky in that I inherited a team that was really solid when I joined Benchling, and they had a lot of historical knowledge. Most of the people on my team have been here a minimum of 3 years, so they've seen kind of what has worked and what hasn't worked. And so I'm not going to hopefully repeat too many of the mistakes of the past. The big problem here with the RevOps team in general was that a few years ago, RevOps was massive. It was like 25 people spread across marketing, sales, CX operations, deal desk, enablement, data analytics. And so it had this really wide span, which is amazing. But then when the old CRO left, they disbanded it and siloed all organizations. So deal desk went to finance, marketing ops went to marketing, et cetera. And so when I came in, the RevOps function kind of lost its seat at the table at an executive level. And so there was no ability to influence the strategy. And instead, we became kind of reactive order takers of here's a strategy, now go implement it without being able to say, well, A, that's not going to work for XYZ reasons, or we've tried this before and here's why it failed. So, like, let's kind of iterate on that. And my biggest thing coming in was trying to figure out, okay, how do we elevate the team back up to be able to be that more proactive, strategic thinking partner? And then also to be able to tell sales managers, like, hey, you need to do X, Y, and Z, and here's why. As opposed to just being told, like, yeah, no, go back to your lane of like giving me the reports that I need and leave me alone.
It's so true. There's two very different types of RevOps I see. There's the RevOps that's very strategic, and you're kind of taking what is the CRO's vision and how do I partner with her or him to make that come true and actually execute that. And then there's also RevOps where I think it used to be more of just like Salesforce ticket takers. It's so that I feel like becoming inching your way to, of course, the execution is also important, but that alone doesn't help you skyrocket your career. You need that strategic element as well.
100%.
Um, so let's talk about relationships with CROs. So something that's very, very important is the relationship between a sales leader or CRO and the head of RevOps. I think that in itself, if that goes poorly, you can have so many issues and run into so many problems and get nothing done. So it seems like you have had many great relationships with many sales leaders and CROs. What is the secret to building that relationship?
Well, one, I've been lucky. So there's always a little bit of that.
Yeah, lucky. Okay, cool.
But in terms of like actually, tactically executing on it, I kind of view my job as two things. Like number one, taking things off the CRO's plate, right? So as an example of that, when I first joined Benchling, our CRO told me he used to spend an hour with finance every week to go through. We were making so many changes in the organization, everything from like new technologies being brought in to new functions being built, investing in new segments or new territories. And so he was having to get a lot of heads up of like, hey, I'm thinking about hiring people in London. I think I need an office there. I think we need to put people in Japan. And so giving them that heads up and having that back and forth dialogue, and then giving finance what they need in terms of, okay, what's the forecast look like for the quarter, the half, et cetera. Uh, and so within a month of me joining, I took that off his plate. It was like, hey, you and I can go through all the specifics one-on-one. I can handle these calls. And so all like the mental prep as well as the actual hours sitting in the meeting that he had to do every week was taken off his plate. And that gave a huge amount of trust to me from him of like, okay, this person is actually like elevating me and allowing me to focus on the things that are really critical for me. The second component I would say is being proactive and giving them intelligence, whether it's like boots on the ground. Hey, I think this rep is at risk. I'm hearing this manager is messing up in X, Y, and Z ways. Like actually having dialogue with the people on the team at the IC level and first line sales leader level, and making sure that you're kind of feeding that back up along with the macro data analysis. Hey, I'm seeing XYZ trend. Pipeline isn't progressing the way we expect it to. Conversion rates are dropping. Like all those things that you can say, like, hey, something is wrong in this area. You might want to go double click in there. But I think the harder part is the more qualitative stuff, where I ask my team, like, hey, I want you every week to meet with a sales rep one on one, either A, shoot the shit and just like see how they're doing, build a relationship, or B, like bring them something around like, hey, I'm seeing this activity that you're doing in all these accounts. Here's what's working, here's what's not. So you're actually giving me something back and like helping educate them and then feeding that back up all the way to the CRO.
That's very good and very tactical advice. I have to say, from being when I was wearing the CRO hat until we hired a head of sales, my head of RevOps did a lot of those same things where it's you come in and you realize you're just so in the weeds on things that you shouldn't be. And so if you can move that on, that is a huge win for a CRO. And then the second thing is sometimes when you're a sales leader, you're so thinking about a specific deal or hiring or this person or how we're going to win these series of deals that you forget to zoom out and look at the numbers and the overall story and like what we might be missing. And so I think having that person to just feed the data for you, even if you don't know what you're looking for, just having someone to surface something and say, hey, this is something I just ran that could be interesting. What do you think? Or, hey, I know we haven't been tracking this number historically, but I think it's something we should start paying attention to next quarter. And here are the 5 things I think we can do to move the needle. Like that goes such a long way.
100%. And what you just said actually made me think too, is especially in this world of like AI, where there's so many new tools coming out, I'm trying to make sure that we are looking at, even if I'm just getting pitched on a tool that can do X, Y, and Z, like just hearing what else is out there and then raising that to our CRO, like, hey, there's a bunch of tools that could theoretically be really positive for us. We should just take a look at it, get a demo of the ones that are the most interesting, right? Like, hey, go look at Pocus. It's doing really amazing things. We should, potentially think about bringing it in as an example.
Yeah, that's awesome. I do think that it is helpful to be able to have someone else that is like seeing around corners for you as well. And something I always tell people like the more that you can come with not just like being a ticket taker, the more that you can come with proactive ideas and solutions, the better. Um, Something that I have kind of struggled with and iterated on in the past is the balance between being data driven versus kind of intuition gut driven, and there's kind of somewhere you need to lean in the middle to make good quick decisions. What is your usually most RevOps people are very data driven. It's like data or nothing. So where do you lean on that spectrum?
Yeah. I mean, look, it's always a little bit of a mixed bag, right? You're never going to have as much data or as thorough of an analysis as you want it to be, right? And the idea is that you don't want to let perfect get in the way of good enough.
Mhm.
And so the first thing that I would do to kind of approach this is figure out if the decision that's being made is in like Bezos's term, a one-way door or a two-way door, right? So a one-way door, like a major market entry or fundamental change to comp plans or like the structure of the team, really needs a lot more rigor, more validation, and ideally you need to set up what are the kind of data points that you're going to be collecting as you roll this out to make sure that it's working the way you want it to. On the other hand, two-way door, like testing out outbound sequences or relocating some like SDR capacity, that can be made a lot more quickly and more directional and more on gut just to see like, okay, does this work? Does this not? And so I know for CROs, and you were just a CRO, speed matters. I really try to make sure that we're arming them with enough insights to make a confident decision without getting stuck in like the analysis paralysis stage.
Yep. Yes, is it a reversible or irreversible decision? Is it something that if you make this decision, you're screwing yourself for the next 6 months, or it's something that you can quickly turn around with not much impact? That we think about it the same way. I'm gonna go into the chat because there's some good questions, so feel free to keep, asking. Um, Job asks, "Can you talk more about how that played out?" Oh, when you were talking about getting a seat back at the strategic table after the exact changes, how did you do that? How did it play out?
Yeah, so because I knew this was something that's really important, not just for the organization, but quite honestly, for me personally, right? I wanted to have a strategic seat at the table. So during my interview process, while I met with all the executive staff, I actually made it very clear that like I will not take this role if I am not able to I don't necessarily need to be the person like building the strategy, but I need to have a seat at the table to be able to influence it and to understand it at a nuanced level and to be able to have my team's voice heard. And so that was something that like early on was very clear. So my CRO made it a priority that on day one, I was invited to certain meetings. I had one-on-one scheduled, at least on a monthly basis, with pretty much everyone cross-functionally in e-staff. And then, I've toggled some of that up and down, depending on like, my CFO, I meet with biweekly, with product, I meet with once a quarter. Uh, but making sure that like that was understood from the get-go, that that is an expectation. And for people that are already in seat, and maybe, you don't have a little bit of the levers that you do when you're negotiating an entry, I think it's really critical to just go to your leader and like have that conversation and add the pros and cons. Like, what's the business case? Why do I need to be part of these conversations? And highlighting that without even just understanding the nuances of the strategy being set, it's really difficult to actually operationalize it. And things get lost in translation when it's kind of being filtered through multiple layers.
Yep. And sometimes when you're part of those conversations, you do a better job executing on it. It's harder to, just get, here's the thing you have to do now, go, versus if you feel bought in, you understand the why, you understand kind of the context, that helps a ton.
Oh,
Um,
and you've seen more of the back and forth of how the decision was being made,
yeah.
where you understand like, okay, we didn't do this thing that I'm thinking of, and we talked about it, and this is the reason why we didn't do it.
Yep, totally. It's also a good point. So if maybe you're not in those conversations, I would also push people to understand the why. Like if you're given kind of a task or an assignment to execute, really doing like what's the context, what's the goal, why are we trying to do this, and of course managers should proactively give that. But when things are moving quickly, it can sometimes slip. Another question from Michael. Let's pick one of his. He said, "How are you dealing with discovery meetings down 30 to 40% in 2025?" That's a good stat I didn't know about.
That's an interesting stat. It doesn't apply to us. So I don't have a good answer. We're fortunate in that we went from an arena where people were not doing pipeline generation. I don't know if that's positive or negative. But our team went, 2020, 2021, 2022. People were just jumping in the boat. So we were getting a lot of hand raisers that wanted to buy Benchling. And then 23, 24, that fell off a cliff. And so we've had to like restart up the PG motion from scratch. And so we're actually seeing a massive uptick in the amount of disco calls being done. But that's because we were starting from a very low base. So I believe it that in the industry it's 30% down. But for Benson, we're driving a lot of that execution because we're really creating a PG culture here, like making it part of the operating rhythm. And so going from, the expectation was that SDRs did all your PG to now the expectation is that everybody's having PG calls. We have a whole day dedicated to it on Mondays. You're not allowed to do anything but PG. You cannot have customer calls. There's no internal calls. Like we are very almost religious about it. You have to come into the office. That's the only day we expect sales reps to be in the office. And so really just making sure that like that is the expectation. Every Friday you send out your 5x5s, which is what are the 5 accounts you're going to PG into on Monday? Who are the 5 people at that account that you're going to talk to? What is your talk track and your messaging around the value proposition and all of that? So like all that is built in and you're expected to actually present that to your manager on Friday night.
Yep, that's great. And that's, I think, the way you do make it work now is starting with the culture of, is this something that we're taking seriously? I also think it's probably a blessing in disguise that you had that, because building that then and getting the foundations right then sets you up for success now, which is great. Let's switch gears a little. You have a 3-layer analysis approach from Excel graphs to strategic recommendations. Can you walk us through that?
Yeah. So it's less of an approach than more so just like as you are thinking about hiring people onto the team, like I typically make sure that we do some sort of a analysis prompt in the interview process, right? So you have to come, like we give a bunch of data, they come back and present to us. And what I would say is like, as people mature in their tenure in ops, they go from, okay, I got a bunch of data. Now I'm going to make 50 different graphs to represent all the data with like 50 different bullet points on what each graph is telling me, right? So that's like layer one. Like you've just like basically visualized the data. Level two is, okay, now I can take all those 50 different data points and I can summarize it into like a 1 or 2 page document with, you know, all the takeaways that I have and like put it in prose form. And so like you are able to process it all, connect it all together and make some coherent points. And then stage three is, okay, now I take all that and I summarize them to 3 bullet points of like, these are 3 major things that I think you should take away from this. And what should we do about it? And I think that the more you as an either an IC or a RevOps leader can move more and more over to the stage three, the easier it will be for you to get to the point where you are able to help set the strategy, you have a seat at the table, and you're able to like really elevate your organization. Otherwise, if you're 1 at 2, you're still going to always be a reactive order taker. If people are going to send you a bunch of data, you're going to give them back this 2 page document, and they're going to have to figure out what to do with it.
Yep. That is I love frameworks. So that is the I appreciate that way of thinking. I'm just checking the chat. Okay, nothing yet. All right, should we switch to the topic that everyone is obsessed with right now, which is AI? What is your prediction of how RevOps will change? Actually, I haven't talked that much about this because the talk of AI is all, are AI going to replace sellers? Oh my god, our jobs are going away, blah blah blah, like which I fundamentally don't agree with. I just think it'll make sellers more productive. But let's talk about AI and RevOps. What is the future transformation of AI and RevOps?
Yeah, so actually going back to something you said earlier, right, where there are some RevOps teams that still kind of operate in this old world of reactive, build a report in Salesforce or do all the Salesforce admin. And then there's the RevOps function that are much more strategic, proactive, and like help set the strategy for the organization. I think AI, in the same way that for sales, right, tool like Focus is going to elevate them and make them better at what they do and hopefully make them more efficient. AI is going to raise the bar for RevOps, right? So on one hand, it makes self-serve easier, which means that if your value is just pulling reports, your job is going to be automated away. But for the teams that really lean in and use AI to like speed up analysis or model out scenarios or, implement data augmentation using a tool like Clay, it makes RevOps much more integral than ever and actually can like almost shift over to taking over some of the roles that like a biz tech team might traditionally have. And so I don't think AI replaces a great RevOps team, but it does expose the gap between a really good strategic RevOps function and a more reactive order taking report building type RevOps.
Yep. And this kind of comes back to everything we started with of RevOps historically has been two different things. You have the strategic folks and more of the order takers, tactical execution. I think AI will be able to get more of the tactical execution, pull reports, run the system, whereas the strategic is needed. And honestly, this is the same with sellers too, right? The parts of selling that is manual and can be automated and doesn't require thinking, great. Automate it away with AI. Whereas your time should be spent on the strategic thinking and relationship building. And it's probably the same with RevOps too, like the relationship building with other stakeholders within your organization.
Hmm. Yeah, 100%.
Um, I appreciate that perspective. All right, we're gonna do two different we're gonna do some rapid fire questions.
Okay.
So when you hire, what is your favorite hiring question?
Okay. So for hiring, I try to follow the framework since you love frameworks of ICE. Have you heard of this?
No.
Okay, so ICCE, and I'm horrible at remembering what it all means. Speech, intelligence, coachability, curiosity, and experience. I already got
Shit.
experience is the easiest one to test for, right? So you can look at someone's resume, like, okay, do they have the right boxes checked? Intelligence, you can get some cues to like in a conversation, or did they go to the right school, or have the right background, or whatever. The coachability and curiosity are the really tough ones to me in a series of like 3 or 4 interviews to test for them. And so my questions as I get to meeting with people is really about those two. And so the number one thing that I ask people that I really try to like ask 4 layers down into is like, what's a good piece of feedback that you've had over the last couple of years? And how have you changed the way that you operate because of the feedback that you got? Right. And you see there, like, one, is someone honest about an area where they're not as strong? Two, what do they do with that information? Do they actually change the way they operate, right? So, like, are they coachable? Did they ask, more questions to feedback? Like, did they get curious about the feedback and actually, like, almost be more self-aware about how they're operating?
I that is one of the best answers I've heard to this question. Very clear framework, and I really appreciate that. Um, I find that it's hard to actually get that in interviews, and I have to do more of the references and back channels really to understand, which of course it's harder for more junior levels, but as you get more senior, usually there's some back channel that's available. You find that as well, or you feel like you can get to it in interview discussions?
I think with that question, if you keep diving deeper and don't let them just go surface level, like, "Oh, yeah, I was told that
Yeah.
my Excel spreadsheets aren't clean enough." It's like, "Okay, come on, like, what's the actual answer?" And if they're not willing to answer you honestly, that to me is also a red flag in and of itself. But the one being like, "Hey, I'm really bad." Like, for me, I'm really disorganized. I just am. I know this about myself. I try to be organized. And I tell my team this off the bat, like, "Hey, like, call me out on if I am dropping balls on things because I'm disorganized." Right. I probably should be saying that on a podcast that's gonna go, no, honest. But I would expect that anyone that I'm interviewing is able to have that level of comfort to be like, "Hey, I'm actually bad at this thing, and it's a real weakness. It's not a strength hidden as a weakness."
Yeah, like, I work too hard
Exactly. I'm too much of a perfectionist.
for the answer.
Yeah.
Uh, and yeah, the curiosity and coachability, it's if someone isn't coachable, if you have to tell them something more than once to change it, nothing drives me more insane.
Yeah, 100%. Feedback should be a gift, right? You should take it and, like, actually put
I
the
agree. That's what we're trained in business school. People always use that line. Um, all right, one more question. Do you have any beliefs that run counter to the popular narrative on LinkedIn or maybe just common wisdom in go to market?
Um, so I think, the first thing that comes to mind, I mentioned it earlier, I think that pipeline coverage ratios are a lazy go-to-market health metric.
Ooh.
So, the standard talk track is, okay, you need 3x or 4x pipeline coverage, and it really gets thrown around kind of like gospel. Uh, but I think that this just hides real problems. You can have 5x coverage and still miss because the deals are low quality or stuck in stages, and the pipeline is just comfort via is what we would call it here, right? It's just coverage doesn't necessarily equal health. And so really understanding what's behind the pipeline, how old is it, what stage is it in, what's your conversion ratios. I'd be perfectly fine at some of the places that I work with a 2x coverage ratio because I know that we close 45% of anything that hits stage one. Right. And so if those are my metrics, I'm perfectly fine with 2x. And so really diving a layer deeper as just being like, oh yeah, we got 3x coverage, we're good.
That goes back to when you're joining a new company, start with first principles versus building a playbook because there's no coverage that is necessarily equal across every company determines it's determined by a lot of different factors. Um, this is awesome. I love talking to RevOps people because you're so structured in your thinking. Everything's a framework. It was awesome chatting today. Thank you so much for the time.
Thanks for having me, Alexa. I really appreciate it.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.